Man, when I originally wrote this video, Sami Zayn was just like a secondary goofy character in the whole bloodline drama, and now he's just decided to pop off and become the hottest thing in professional wrestling once again. Which means I think it's only fair that we get into his past, get into his roots, and get into the man who made him who he is today. Today, let's talk about El Generico. Now, before we get into the video proper, I do need to just address one small thing, and it's the fact that Sami Zayn is absolutely not El Generico. I'm sorry, I know like the dirt sheets think they know the answers, the rumor mill likes to talk about it like it's true, but I got news for you, Dave Meltzer. Sami Zayn and El Generico, two completely different people. I mean, think about it. El Generico is from Tijuana, Mexico, and Sami Zayn is from Montreal, Quebec, Canada. How can you be from two different places at the same time? Check and mate. Not to mention, Sami Zayn speaks English and French. And as for El Generico, he barely speaks Spanish. So booyah, clearly two separate people. But for my newcomers here, who exactly is El Generico? Well, he is the pride of Tijuana, the generic luchador, arguably one of the greatest babyfaces to ever hit the world of professional wrestling. Not to mention, the man was literally a Swiss Army knife of workers. He could do a comedy match with Delirious and then do some insane high-flying action with Kota Ibushi before going out there and engaging in a violent and bloody, brutal ladder war to close things off. He was the first guy to really bridge the gap between being a silly comedy wrestler and a serious main event threat, which is what arguably made him one of the greatest professional wrestlers of all time. So El Generico started out wrestling mostly in Canada, you know, like all great Mexican luchadors do. And during his first match for IWS, whether he knew it or not, Generico was being sent out there simply as fodder. A generic luchador meant to get beat around by a violent beast who was out there simply to pick his teeth with Generico's bones. But as the match went on, and as Generico took more and more punishment, the crowd began to turn. No longer were they paying attention to the technical acumen of this violent beast that Generico was in there with. Instead, they were worrying a lot more about Generico. They were cheering for him. They began to chant "Olay" throughout the match, trying to will him back to his feet for a match that, shockingly, Generico would eventually win. Albeit, it was a win by countout after he got his neck snapped in a chair, but it was a win nonetheless, let's be honest. Generico would continue to work for IWS over the next few years, mostly working with a guy he would become synonymous with on the independent wrestling scene, Kevin Steen, a man who would take Generico's penchant for being able to handle punishment and testing that to its limits during just about every single match they had. Eventually, the IWS crew began to break America, where Generico would get noticed by a company that would eventually make him their champion, PWG. And once Generico broke America, there was really no going back. He intended to leave his mark on every single promotion he stepped into, whether that was Evolve, Dragon Gate, Chikara, or most importantly, Ring of Honor, the home of his most devastating, violent feud against Kevin Steen himself. A feud that, let's be honest, I can and probably will do an entire video about. Unfortunately, that's a feud that Steen would end up winning, as in 2012, the duo would face off one last time in a ladder war for the Ring of Honor World Heavyweight Championship. And unfortunately, Steen would walk away victorious, and Generico would walk away for good. He would retire to Tijuana, where he would open up his very own orphanage, Los Angelitos de El Generico, A couple of years later, Steen would come out during an interview, now Kevin Owens, and would report that El Generico died in a fire in Tijuana. But a couple of years later, Generico would resurface on social media on Twitter, which leads him to prove two things that he has intended to prove throughout his entire career: that Kevin Steen is full of shit, and that El Generico will never die. And that was proven when, the year after his retirement, his prized pupil Sami Zayn made his entrance into WWE's NXT, ensuring that El Generico's legacy lived on in the hallowed halls of World Wrestling Entertainment. But Sami Zayn is not El Generico. I'm not repeating it again. You guys just need to understand that. Sami Zayn is not El Generico. And unfortunately, I think El Generico's presence is one that is sorely missed in the independent wrestling scene. I think he could teach the new crop of wrestlers so much about how to grow their brand, how to grow their characters. Technically, when you think about it, El Generico was the first ever quote-unquote Twitter wrestler. Before you had Warhorse screaming about ruling ass or Danhausen selling one of 80 different products with his face on it, you had Generico sending out tweets to his fans using his EG web translator. But it went beyond that. El Generico wasn't satisfied simply being this goofy character. He was willing to take things that extra step, to grow things, and to become something that we hadn't seen before in professional wrestling. He took the fan base that the goofy comedy character brought in and managed to parlay that into successful storylines and intense emotional battles. He took the criticisms that he was just a goofy comedy character that could never main event and managed to wear that as his badge of honor. Anytime he stepped into the ring, he wasn't just fighting for victory, he was fighting for approval. He was fighting to prove that his positivity, his goofiness, his unique brand of wrestling belonged in the main event, just like all great wrestling does. The story of El Generico is one of persistence. Through betrayal, through heartbreak, through pain and blood, El Generico persisted despite it all. He fought to maintain that little spark of happiness, that little spark of positivity that we all need to keep throughout all of his matches. He was the ultimate underdog, facing all of the odds and coming out on top. When you look at the great hall of baby faces throughout the world of professional wrestling, you've got Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, you've got Rey Mysterio, and you've got El Generico. Throughout his career, he ended up claiming way more championships than, let's be honest, anybody thought he would have. He was a 2-time PWG champion, a 5-time PWG Tag Team champion, Ring of Honor TV and Tag champion, not to mention earned Ring of Honor its only Feud of the Year award from The Observer for his battles with Kevin Steen. Anywhere that El Generico went, whether that was DDT in Japan, WXW in Germany, or of course Ring of Honor here in America, he flourished. And let's be honest, his moveset definitely played a part in that. Despite being known as the generic luchador, I wouldn't define his style as simply lucha. Instead, Generico was more of a hybrid of styles from Mexico and Japan and America. Basically, anywhere that had pro wrestling influenced El Generico in some way. He could do beautiful moves like a tope suicida into a tornado DDT on the outside before hitting a violent and devastating exploder suplex, dropping someone on their skull in the corner. He also adopted the Yakuza kick, a terrifying big boot to an opponent seated in the corner, a move that would eventually be adopted by his prized pupil Sami Zayn as the Helluva kick. But there is one move of his that even Sami Zayn would never touch. One of the most terrifying things I have ever seen in professional wrestling, a top rope brainbuster, sending his opponent crashing down onto the top turnbuckle and more than often flying 10 feet out of the ring to the concrete. It is one of the most devastating maneuvers in the history of professional wrestling, and let's be honest, it probably shouldn't be done nowadays, but it still looks cool as hell. So that is the Cliff's Notes on the career of one El Generico, but where do you go next? Maybe you're intrigued, you want to learn more about the Masked Man, you want to learn more about the generic luchador. Well, luckily, you're on the exact website for the job, because a lot of Generico's matches, promos, and whatever have all been ported directly here to YouTube. Here, let me give you a quick rundown. I'll put links in the description and all that if you want to check them out. If you want to look at Generico's more comedic side, you can check out his promo with Colt Cabana at Tremendous 2, or his promo with Paul London at DDT 4. If you're looking for a match, I mentioned it earlier, and I'll mention it again. One of my favorite comedy matches of all time, Delirious versus El Generico at IWA Mid-South. Now, if you're more of a fan of the high-flying car crash spot monkey type of matches, it's hard to get better than El Generico, Jigsaw, Nick Jackson, and Kota Ibushi all in one ring at the King of Trios. It was a phenomenal match. It has an insane sequence that you've probably already been recommended on YouTube, let's be honest, between Generico and Ibushi. Yeah, absolutely check that out. But let's be honest, if we're talking about the best of El Generico, if we're talking about the greatest things to happen in his career, I would be remiss if I did not bring up Kevin Steen. I'll be honest, one of my favorite matches of all time, arguably my favorite no DQ match of all time, is Steen versus Generico, Fight Without Honor at Final Battle. It was the culmination of a year-long bloody feud that saw Generico lose everything, including his mask, and this match was his fight to reclaim that identity back. It's such a good match. Just watch it. It's so good. But let's be honest, anytime Generico and Steen fight each other, it's amazing. There's Steen Wolf. There's the Ladder Wars. If you see those two fight, it's gonna be a great time. Their chemistry is absolutely off the charts. But this is just the tip of the iceberg, to be honest with you. A quick YouTube search for El Generico, you'll find matches with Claudio Castagnoli, with Bryan Danielson, with some of the best in the industry. So I'm just gonna leave it up to you. Go to the search bar, type in El Generico, and get to adventuring. It's gonna be a good time, I guarantee it. So that was the tale of El Generico, the Pride of Tijuana, Mexico's favorite son, the generic luchador. If there was anything I missed or any tales about El Generico you'd like to tell, put them in the comments below. I'd love to read them. Generico is probably in my top 5 favorite wrestlers of all time, and I'd love to talk about him with you guys. But hey, what do you guys want to talk about next? Who should I bring up next? Did you like this format of video where I kind of tell you guys movesets and what matches to watch? Or do you just want the stories? Let me know in the comments below. We're still trying to figure out what we should do for these videos on Fight Boys. But in the meantime and between time, leave a comment, do a subscribe, like it, do whatever YouTube people do. Because when you're a Fight Boy, you're a Fight Boy for life.